The early light of morning stretched over the Kansas plains, quiet but heavy with tension. At the edge of a weather-worn homestead, 200 Apache warriors sat still as statues, mounted on their horses in a perfect line that framed the barn like a silent judgment. Not a single voice rose. Not a single hand moved. They just waited. And in that deafening silence, every settler within miles could feel that something grave had happened. Inside the barn, Jeremiah Callahan gripped his Winchester rifle, his back pressed tight against the wooden wall. His hands, weathered from years of working the land, trembled as he peered through a crack in the boards. Faces painted with sacred symbols stared toward his home. Lances glinted in the early light. Eyes sharp and unreadable studied his land with an intensity that felt like being hunted. But all Jeremiah could think about was his daughter. Clara had been playing down by the creek less than an hour ago while he checked on a sick calf. Now she was nowhere in sight, and these warriors had come with a purpose that terrified him. One figure broke from the line, tall, proud, and deliberate. He walked toward the barn, his moccasins making no sound on the hard ground. Even from a distance, Jeremiah could see the feathers woven into the man's long black hair and the respect radiating from the braves behind him. This wasn't a raiding party. This was a leader. The man stopped 20 feet from the barn and, to Jeremiah's astonishment, spoke in perfect English. Jeremiah Callahan. "I am Soaring Bear of the Mescalero Apache. We need to talk." The fact that the warrior knew his name sent a chill down Jeremiah's spine. But what truly shook him was the tone, calm, respectful, not demanding or cruel. Soaring Bear went on, "Your daughter did something yesterday my people have never seen from a white child, something that demands our attention." Jeremiah stepped away from the wall, his mind racing with questions. What could Clara, just 8 years old, possibly have done to draw the attention of one of the most revered Apache leaders yesterday at sunset? Soaring Bear continued, "One of my warriors on Gray Elk was dying beside the creek on your land. He had been wounded days earlier and came here to pass in peace. Your daughter found him." Jeremiah's stomach twisted. That grove by the creek was Clara's favorite place to build little forts with sticks and stones, to collect wildflowers and pretend the world was kind. Soaring Bear's voice softened. She did not scream. She did not run. She sat beside him, and when she saw that he was cold, she removed the wool blanket from her shoulders, the one she carries always, and covered him with it. Then she stayed, holding his hand, singing to him until he passed. Jeremiah felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. That blanket had been sewn by Clara's late mother. It was her treasure, and she had given it away without hesitation. She honored him. Soaring Bear said simply, she gave him comfort, dignity, and peace in his final moments. No white person has ever done such a thing for one of our dying warriors. But then his tone changed. "Yet we found something else this morning. Beside Gray Elk's body, we discovered your daughter's hair ribbon stained with blood. It was not Gray Elk's blood. It was hers." Jeremiah's heart nearly stopped. Clara was hurt, perhaps worse, and he had spent the morning hiding with a rifle instead of looking for her. "Where is she?" he demanded, stepping from the barn. The line of warriors shifted slightly, but no one reached for their weapons. Soaring Bear raised a hand. "According to Apache law, when someone shows such honor to one of our dead, they become part of our tribe. Your daughter's actions have bonded her to us." Jeremiah stared in disbelief. "She's just a little girl. She doesn't understand your laws." Soaring Bear nodded solemnly. "That is why they carry weight, because her kindness was pure. She did not act from duty or fear. She acted from compassion. She is one of us now." Then came the deeper problem. The blood on her ribbon tells us she was hurt, and if we find her wounded, Apache law requires we take her to be cared for among our people. Jeremiah reeled at the thought. Soaring Bear added, "There is one way this can be resolved differently. You may earn the right to raise her by proving yourself worthy through 3 tests." Before Jeremiah could answer, a faint cry drifted through the air. A child's voice, weak and frightened. "Daddy." Both men turned toward the sound, which came from the direction of an abandoned mine shaft. Jeremiah moved to run, but Soaring Bear stopped him. "It could be a trap. The soldiers have used wounded children as bait before." "I don't care," Jeremiah replied. "That's my daughter." Soaring Bear signaled to 20 warriors who moved like shadows toward the shaft. Minutes later, a scout returned. "She is alive but trapped." The mine had collapsed partially. Clara had fallen through rotting boards into a shaft 15 feet down. Loose rocks shifted dangerously around her. "We have 20 minutes before the shaft collapses," the scout said. Jeremiah's mind raced. "We need ropes, supports." Soaring Bear shook his head. "There is no time. This is your first test. Trust our medicine man, Red Moon. He knows this mine. He will ask the spirits to hold it steady." Skepticism battled with fear in Jeremiah's heart. But when Clara's voice echoed again, begging for help, he knew he would put his faith anywhere if it meant saving her. Red Moon appeared, old but sharp-eyed, and began chanting at the edge of the shaft, placing stones and bones with precision. "He listens to the mountain," Soaring Bear said. Red Moon's hands moved over the rocks like they were reading a story. "She is on a ledge," he announced. "Her leg is broken, so we have 10 minutes. "I'll go," Jeremiah said. "No," Soaring Bear replied. "You're too heavy. The ledge won't hold." But Jeremiah insisted, "Teach me how to move like you. I must be the one." Soaring Bear saw the fire in his eyes and agreed. Jeremiah shed his boots. "Belt anything heavy." He lowered himself carefully, each movement deliberate, trusting the wood, the rock, and the Apache way. He found Clara conscious but in pain. He hushed her gently, tied the rope around them both, and gave the signal. They began to rise, but her leg brushed a beam, and the mine groaned with warning. Debris fell around them. Outside, cavalry soldiers had arrived and, seeing the Apache warriors, assumed a siege. Shots rang out. But instead of returning fire, every Apache dismounted, laid down weapons, and raised their hands. They surrendered. Inside the shaft, Jeremiah and Clara were pulled free just as it collapsed behind them. Dust-covered but alive, they emerged into chaos and silence. The lieutenant stared at the Apache in disbelief. Soaring Bear declared, "We saved this child, not harmed her." Jeremiah stood with Clara in his arms, and the world around them shifted. This wasn't war. This was humanity, and it had been Clara's compassion that started it all. The morning was unnaturally quiet, the kind of stillness that wrapped around a man's chest like a tightening rope. Levi Barrett stood frozen beside his barn, heart pounding as he watched the long line of Apache warriors stretching across his field like a living wall. 200 horses stood motionless, their riders unmoving, their painted faces unreadable. It was the kind of moment that made a man count his regrets. But Levi wasn't thinking of himself. He was thinking of his daughter, Lily, 8 years old, bright as spring sunshine. She'd been playing down by the creek, and now she was nowhere in sight. Somewhere between the sick calf in the barn and the morning's chores, she had vanished, and these warriors had arrived. One man dismounted, tall and dignified, eyes like polished obsidian. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the barn. Levi didn't breathe. The stranger stopped 20 feet away and called out in perfect English, "Levi Barrett. I am Iron Hawk of the Mescalero Apache. We need to speak." That voice, calm and clear, echoed across the dry field. Levi lowered his rifle, confused more than relieved. Iron Hawk wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting threats or demands. He was respectful, almost solemn. Then came words that struck deeper than fear. "Your daughter did something yesterday that has never been seen by my people. Something we must honor." Levi stepped from the shadows of the barn, blood thundering in his ears. "My daughter's missing," he said. "Lily, she was playing near the creek." Iron Hawk nodded slowly. "We know. That is where she met Grey Wolf. He was one of our own, a warrior wounded by soldiers 3 days ago. He crawled far to die in peace beneath the cottonwoods near your water. Your daughter found him." Levi's breath caught. The grove near the creek was Lily's favorite place. She spent hours there with her dolls, stacking little stones and weaving flower crowns. When she found him, Ironhawk continued, he was cold, bleeding, close to the spirit world. He expected fear. He expected to die alone. Instead, your daughter knelt beside him. She removed the blanket from her own shoulders and wrapped it around him. A child's blanket, soft and worn, made with love. Then she stayed. Levi closed his eyes. That blanket was more than cloth. It had belonged to Lily's mother, his wife, who'd sewn it before the fever took her. Lily had carried it with her every day since. That she gave it away said everything. She sang to him. Ironhawk said. She held his hand. She placed wildflowers on his chest. She spoke words of peace. He passed with dignity because of her. Levi swallowed hard. Tears threatened to come, but he pushed them down. She didn't know what she was doing, he whispered. No, Ironhawk replied, and that is what makes it sacred. Her kindness was not taught. It came from her spirit. But the chief's face grew more serious. There is more. We found something near Grey Wolf's body, a ribbon blue, frayed at the ends. It was soaked in blood. Not his. Levi's knees nearly buckled. Lily's ribbon, the one she wore every day. If the blood wasn't Grey Wolf's, it could only be hers. Panic surged in his chest. Where is she? He asked, voice cracking. Is she alive? Ironhawk did not answer immediately. Instead, he said, there is a reason we are here. Levi Barrett. According to our law, when someone shows such honor to one of our dying, they become kin. Your daughter is now Apache. Her spirit walks with us. Levi shook his head. She's 8 years old. She didn't know your customs. She was just being kind. Exactly. Ironhawk replied. True honor is never performed for recognition. Her spirit acted freely, that is why we cannot ignore it. Levi stepped forward, fists clenched. You came to take her. We came to protect what she has become, Ironhawk answered. But first, we must find her. The ribbon tells us she is wounded. We have trackers searching now. Just then, a young scout approached on horseback. Breathless, he spoke quickly in Apache. Ironhawk turned to Levi. They found her. She fell into a ravine beyond the cottonwoods. Her leg is broken. She cannot climb out. Levi didn't wait. He ran fast as his boots would carry him. Ironhawk and several warriors close behind. When they reached the edge of the ravine, Levi dropped to his knees. There she was, Lily huddled on a ledge 10 feet down, face pale, blood on her ankle. Daddy, she cried. I can't move, I'm here, sweetheart. Levi called, his throat tight. He turned to the warriors. Rope. I need rope. Ironhawk knelt beside him. If you go down, the rocks may shift. You must move like stone, not like fear. Levi nodded. They tied a rope to a nearby pine and lowered him slowly. Each inch felt like a lifetime. He could hear the gravel slipping, feel the earth groan beneath his boots. But Lily looked up at him with those big, trusting eyes. And everything else fell away. When he reached her, he cradled her gently. Hold tight, baby girl. Together, they rose, inch by inch. When they reached the surface, Levi pulled her close, heart pounding. Ironhawk stepped forward. You faced danger without hesitation. You acted with the same heart she did. Now comes the hardest question. Levi looked up, holding Lily. Ask it. Ironhawk's voice was steady. Would you give up everything, your land, your home, if it meant honoring what she has become to us? Levi didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. I'd give it all. Ironhawk's face softened. Then you understand. He reached into his pouch and pulled out Lily's ribbon, clean now, carefully folded. He placed it in Levi's hand. She will always be both of your blood and of our spirit. Raise her to honor both. Levi nodded, tears finally falling. In that moment, surrounded by warriors who had come not with hate but reverence, he knew his daughter's act of kindness had changed not just her future, but his own. What began as a mystery had become a bond, one that crossed borders, languages, and history, and it all began with a little girl, a dying man, and a blanket made of love. The wind was still as a whisper that morning, yet something in the air felt heavy, like the prairie itself was holding its breath. Nathaniel Green stood on his porch, eyes fixed on the long line of Apache riders stretching across the field. Their formation was precise, silent, and unwavering. 200 warriors, mounted and painted, watched his homestead with the solemnity of a ceremony. No one shouted, no arrows were raised, no weapons drawn, but the message was unmistakable. Something sacred had taken place, and they had come to answer it. He tightened his grip on the worn banister, heart pounding beneath his flannel shirt. Somewhere in that rising tension, he heard footsteps approaching, not rushed, not aggressive, but calm and steady. A single figure walked out from the front line. The man was tall, dressed in soft leather, and adorned with symbols that bore generations of meaning. He stopped a respectful distance from the porch. "Are you Nathaniel Green?" he asked in crisp English. Nathaniel gave a slow nod, uncertain of what would follow. "I am White Raven, of the Mescalero Apache. We come not in anger, but in reverence. Your daughter, Elsie, has done something that cannot be ignored." Nathaniel's heart dropped. "Elsie," he whispered, voice caught in his throat. "She went to the river yesterday, to gather wildflowers. She hasn't come back." White Raven nodded slowly. "We know. One of our scouts followed her trail. She is alive, and what she did, what she gave, is a matter of deep spiritual importance." Nathaniel felt the ground sway slightly beneath him. "What did she do?" he asked, eyes narrowing. White Raven's gaze softened. "She found one of our warriors, Red Willow, who had been wounded in the mountains. He crawled to your creek, seeking solitude in his final moments. She did not run. She did not scream. She sat beside him." Nathaniel blinked, barely believing the words. "She's only 9, he said. "She doesn't even understand. And that," White Raven said gently, "is what makes it sacred." He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if telling a prayer. She removed her blanket, the blue one, stitched with stars, and wrapped it around Red Willow's shoulders. She stayed until the end. She sang to him, placed blossoms on his chest, held his hand as he crossed into the spirit world. Nathaniel stared, lips parted. That blanket had been made by Elsie's late mother. It was the one thing she had clung to after the woman's passing. That she had given it up said everything about her heart. White Raven continued. "In Apache law, such an act, unasked, unprompted, is sacred. A gesture like that creates a bond of spirit. She is no longer just a child of your blood. She is of us now. The tribe recognizes her as one of our own." Nathaniel took a step back. "She's my daughter," he said firmly. "You can't just claim her because she showed compassion." "We do not claim her," White Raven replied. "We honor her, and we honor you for raising such a spirit." The world felt unreal. The horizon swam in a blur of wind and silence. But then White Raven's tone darkened. "There is more. When our scouts found Red Willow's body, they also found Elsie's scarf torn and bloodied. She is hurt. We tracked her to a ravine north of your property. She fell and could not climb out." Nathaniel's breath caught. "Where is she now? Safe?" White Raven said. "Our warriors reached her before nightfall. We kept her warm, treated her injuries, but she has not spoken. She calls for her father." Nathaniel's legs nearly gave out. "We brought her here," White Raven added. "She sleeps in our camp at the tree line. We came not to take her, but to return her in the way she deserves to her father, and to a world that now includes both our peoples." Nathaniel looked past the chief to the line of riders. One horse carried a bundle wrapped in soft hides. At its center, cradled and calm, was his daughter. Her cheeks were pale, her hair tangled with prairie grass, but she was alive, and in her arms, folded tightly against her chest, was a new blanket woven by Apache hands. He walked toward her slowly, as if crossing into a different life. When he reached the horse, a young warrior dismounted and gently passed Elsie into his arms. She stirred and opened her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered. "I didn't mean to lose the blanket." Nathaniel held her close, brushing back her hair. "You didn't lose anything, sweetheart," he said. "You gave something beautiful." The warriors remained still, not speaking, watching as the two embraced. Nathaniel turned back to White Raven. "What happens now?" White Raven approached. "You have a choice. Raise her only in your world, or honor both. Let her learn the songs of your people and ours. Let her wear the teachings of both spirits." Nathaniel looked down at Elsie. Her hand was clutching the edge of the new blanket, the edge embroidered with symbols he didn't understand but knew were sacred. "She has already chosen," he said quietly, "and I will follow her lead." White Raven extended his hand, and Nathaniel took it. The handshake was firm, mutual, without domination, a gesture not of conquest, but of kinship. As the warriors turned to leave, their horses moved in unison, like a tide receding. Elsie slept in his arms, her breathing soft and steady. The land around them had not changed. The barn still stood, the trees still rustled, but something deeper had shifted. His daughter's heart had opened a path across a cultural canyon most men were too afraid to cross, and in doing so, she had not just saved a dying man, she had become a bridge between two worlds, built not with treaties or force, but with a blanket, a song, and the courage of a child. The prairie wind had picked up by mid-morning, brushing the tall grass like whispers from the past. The Apache riders remained still, horses calm but watchful, as if even the animals understood the weight of what was unfolding. Isaac McAllister stood near the edge of his barn, the earth beneath his boots dry and cracked, but the tension in the air thick as a thunderstorm about to break. He had barely processed what Chief Gray Falcon had told him, that his young daughter Nora had sat with a dying Apache warrior the night before, wrapping him in her cherished blanket and singing to him until his final breath. That sacred act had earned her the deepest respect of the tribe. But now came news far more terrifying. Nora was missing, and her blood-stained hair ribbon had been found near the fallen warrior's body. The ribbon was unmistakably hers, delicate blue silk, frayed at the edges, hand-stitched with tiny sunflowers by her mother before she passed. Isaac stared at it. His breath caught in his throat, the knot of panic in his chest pulled tighter. Chief Gray Falcon held the ribbon carefully, as if it were a sacred relic. "This was found near Swift River's body, although there is blood on it, not his." Isaac's voice trembled. "Where is she? Is she alive?" The chief nodded solemnly. "We do not know yet, but our trackers have picked up a trail. She walked some distance after leaving the creek. Her steps were uneven. There was a drag mark, then nothing." That silence filled Isaac with dread. One of the younger scouts galloped up and dismounted, speaking urgently in Apache. Gray Falcon turned to Isaac with urgency in his voice. "They found her. North Ridge, near the abandoned mining pit. She fell in." Isaac didn't wait for another word. He ran toward his horse and swung into the saddle in one fluid motion, spurring the animal into a full gallop before the chief could offer details. Dust kicked up in plumes behind him as he tore across the field, followed closely by several Apache riders. When they reached the ridge, he saw it, a narrow opening in the ground, half covered by tumbleweed and debris, its frame weakened by time and disrepair. Around it, footprints scattered in all directions as warriors examined the scene. Isaac dropped from his horse and rushed to the edge. A 10-foot drop yawned below, jagged rock giving way to a narrow shaft. He called out, "Nora." The answer came faint and broken. "Papa." Her voice was weak, trembling, echoing up from the dark. "My leg hurts. I can't move." Relief surged through him like water in a dry well. But it was short-lived. The ground around the shaft shifted under his boots. Loose rock tumbled downward. The mine was unstable, decades old, hollowed out and forgotten. The wrong movement could collapse the shaft entirely. Chief Gray Falcon knelt beside him. "We must act quickly. If the ceiling falls, there will be no chance of survival." Isaac grabbed a coil of rope and tested its strength. I'm going down. The chief placed a hand on his shoulder. Let our medicine man examine the shaft first. He understands how the earth breathes. The man they called Silent Stone approached. An elder with deep-set eyes and movements as deliberate as flowing water. He spoke a few quiet words to the earth, placed a palm to the ground, and listened. Then he looked up. The shaft is trembling. Gray Falcon translated. We have only minutes. Isaac lowered himself slowly, the rope biting into his palms. Below, he saw Nora curled on a ledge, her face pale, her dress torn, one leg twisted unnaturally. I'm here, baby, he whispered, voice raw. She tried to smile through the tears. I dropped the flowers, she said softly, for the man I sang to. Isaac's throat tightened, but he steadied himself. You did good, sweetheart. You did something beautiful. Now let's get you home. He reached her and wrapped his arms around her gently, careful not to jostle her leg. She winced but didn't cry. He tied the rope around them both and gave the signal. Above, warriors pulled with quiet urgency. The shaft groaned under their weight. Isaac could hear pebbles falling, dust shifting, wood creaking with the stress. The final stretch felt endless. Just as they reached the surface, a loud crack split the air, and a section of the shaft collapsed inward. But they were clear. Hands reached out to pull them the rest of the way. Nora clung to him, face pressed to his chest, while Gray Falcon spoke to the others in hushed tones. Silent Stone bowed his head and whispered something Isaac couldn't understand. Then Gray Falcon looked at him, eyes somber but warm. She is safe because of your courage, he said. But what you did today was only part of the path. She belongs to both our peoples now by law of spirit. Isaac nodded slowly, holding his daughter close. Then teach me how to honor both sides, he said, so she never feels torn between them. The chief studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Then we begin not with word, but with walking the land together. Come, brother, let us finish this day not as strangers, but as men who have shared a rescue and a vow. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the last tremors of fear faded, Isaac stood with Nora in his arms, surrounded by warriors who had come not to fight, but to find one of their own. The crisis had revealed something greater than danger. It had revealed kinship, born not of blood, but of courage, compassion, and the love of a child. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods as Caleb Darnell stood at the edge of the ravine, peering into the darkness below, where his daughter, Ruth, lay injured and unable to move. Her voice had grown faint, barely more than a whisper when she cried out for him. Just moments ago, he had learned from the Apache scouts that she had fallen into the crumbling shaft of an abandoned silver mine. The rope marks, the fractured soil, and the echo of her cries told them all they needed to know. She was alive, but not for long. The mine was old and brittle, the kind that hadn't seen light or foot traffic in decades. It wasn't just dangerous, it was dying. Beside him, Chief Red Eagle stood silently, flanked by his men. The warriors were calm but alert, their faces grave. A sense of ritual hung in the air, something Caleb didn't fully understand. But the man who stepped forward next carried more than calmness. He carried something older, heavier. Silent Thunder, the tribe's medicine man, approached the edge of the ravine. He didn't speak at first. He simply placed his hand on the earth, closed his eyes, and began to hum a low, resonant tone that sent a strange stillness through the group. Caleb crouched beside him, watching with skepticism. His instincts screamed for action: climb down, grab Ruth, pull her out. It was what any father would do. But Red Eagle placed a firm hand on his shoulder. If you go in without knowing the earth's will, he said quietly, you may bury her alive. Caleb stared at the chief. She's my daughter. I have to do something. Red Eagle didn't blink. Then trust us. Trust our way. Our ancestors have moved through this land for centuries. Silent Thunder speaks with it. If he says we move, we move. If he says we wait. Caleb looked back into the hole. Ruth's voice floated up again, softer this time, more fragile. Daddy, The sound pierced him. Every fiber of his being demanded he act. But then he looked at Silent Thunder, who had begun placing stones in a circle around the edge of the ravine, chanting softly in a language Caleb didn't know but somehow felt. The other warriors stood in silence, not as bystanders but as guardians. There was no panic in them, only focus. Caleb had always believed in what he could touch, what he could see. But this wasn't about logic. This was about life, his daughters, and for once, he had to let go of control. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said, voice barely steady. "I'll trust him." Silent Thunder opened his eyes and gave the faintest nod. Red Eagle called out in Apache, and two young warriors uncoiled rope and began preparing a harness. Silent Thunder pointed to a path along the rocks, leading to a side ledge where the earth had not yet shifted. "You must go," he told Caleb through the chief's translation, "but only where the stones guide your feet. Do not fight the earth. Listen." They wrapped the harness around Caleb's chest and shoulders, securing it carefully. Every knot was double-checked, every step mapped with care. Silent Thunder led the chant, low and rhythmic, as if steadying the ground beneath them. Caleb lowered himself slowly into the shaft, the air cooling with each foot of descent. Dust filled his nose, and the groans of the old mine crept around him like whispers. But Ruth's eyes came into view, wide and wet with tears, and everything else fell away. He reached her ledge and knelt beside her. Her leg was swollen, twisted unnaturally, but she was alive. "I'm here, sweetheart," he murmured, brushing her tangled hair back. "We're getting you out." She nodded weakly. "Is Mom watching?" she whispered. Caleb blinked hard. "She is," he said. "And she's proud." He tied the rope gently around them both. Above, the Apache warriors moved with purpose. The chanting never stopped. Neither did the silence. It was a strange paradox, noise without panic, urgency without chaos. Caleb could feel it holding the mind together like unseen hands. Then the ascent began, inch by inch. They rose, every creak of wood a fresh spike of fear. Rocks crumbled, dust rained down, but the rope held, and so did Caleb. At the top, strong arms pulled them free. And as soon as his boots hit solid ground, Caleb collapsed to his knees. Holding Ruth tightly to his chest, she was sobbing now, not in pain, but in relief. Silent Thunder stepped forward and placed something in Caleb's palm, a small stone carved with the symbol part sun, part river. "You trusted our way," Red Eagle said. "Now the earth knows your name." Caleb looked down at the stone, then at the faces around him. These weren't strangers anymore. They were part of the moment that had saved his daughter's life. He stood slowly, still holding Ruth, and met the eyes of the chief. "Thank you," he said. "Thank all of you." Red Eagle nodded. "This was only the first test. You were willing to let go of what you knew to save what you loved. The land remembers that." As the wind passed again through the trees, it no longer felt ominous. It felt like breath. Caleb had walked into the ravine a man of one world, but he came out marked by another, and though the danger had passed, he knew something deeper had just begun. The air was thick with tension as the sun climbed higher over the ridge, casting long shadows across the open pit. Clay Whitmore stood at the edge of the collapsing mine shaft, eyes fixed on the rope lowering into darkness, every heartbeat pounding like a drum in his ears. Below, his daughter Ruth lay injured and barely conscious, her small frame curled on a narrow ledge deep within the shaft. The Apache medicine man, known as Silent Thunder, had marked the safest path through the unstable earth. But the danger was far from over. Clay had listened to their chants, watched their rituals, but when the time came to act, he couldn't sit back and let someone else reach his child. He insisted it be him. No scout, no warrior, just a father. Chief Red Eagle had tried to reason with him, warning that the shaft might not hold under his weight. But Clay was adamant. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, told the chief everything he needed to know. He would risk his life without hesitation if it meant saving Ruth. With the rope secured and the chants continuing in rhythm, he began the descent. each step echoing through the hollow pit. Dust fell like mist, and the smell of old earth and rotting timber filled his lungs. He moved slowly, carefully, placing his boots exactly where silent thunder had shone. One wrong step, one jolt, and the entire mine could collapse. Reaching Ruth felt like touching salvation. She was pale, lips dry, her leg twisted unnaturally beneath her. But when she saw his face, a faint smile flickered across her mouth. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice no louder than a breath. He knelt beside her and touched her cheek gently. "I'm here, baby girl," he said. "We're getting out of this together." He secured the rope around her with trembling hands, careful not to jostle her broken leg. Then, tying it around himself, he gave the signal. Above, the Apache warriors began to pull. As the rope tightened and they began to rise, the shaft groaned under the shifting weight. Pieces of timber snapped, and loose stone trickled down like sand in an hourglass. Clay held Ruth close, shielding her with his body, whispering words of comfort he barely heard himself. The climb was slow, agonizing. Every inch felt like it could be the last. But the rhythm of the chanting above never faltered. It held them steady, a strange and ancient force that seemed to hold the mine in place with more strength than rope or wood ever could. They were halfway to the surface when the sound of hooves thundered across the plain. Dust clouds rose beyond the ridge. A patrol of U.S. cavalry, 5 riders strong, came charging toward the camp, rifles slung and eyes filled with suspicion. From a distance, the gathered Apache warriors looked like a raiding party. The men, the horses, the weapons, everything about the scene spelled danger to men trained to fear what they didn't understand. The cavalry halted abruptly, the captain barking orders. "What's going on here?" he shouted. "Put your weapons down." The Apache didn't flinch, didn't raise a weapon, didn't move at all. Chief Red Eagle stepped forward calmly, hands open and empty. "We are helping a child," he said. "She is one of your own and now one of ours." The captain raised a rifle. "That girl's in that hole. Her father is down there with her," the chief replied. "They will be out in moments." The standoff crackled with tension. One wrong move, one frightened soldier, and bullets would fly. The Apache remained still as statues, bound not by fear but discipline. Red Eagle slowly motioned for the warriors to lower their spears, and one by one, they did, laying them gently on the ground as a sign of peace. Down in the shaft, Clay had no idea what was happening above. The only thing he noticed was that the rope began to shake slightly. Hesitating, he looked up and shouted, "Hold steady." Dust filled his eyes. A large stone cracked free from above and fell, striking his shoulder. He winced but didn't cry out. Ruth stirred in his arms. "Are we almost there?" she asked. "Almost," he whispered, ignoring the pain. Back at the surface, the captain finally saw the top of Clay's head appear over the edge of the shaft. His face, covered in sweat and grime, bore the unmistakable look of a desperate father. And in his arms, wrapped in hides and blankets, was Ruth. Her tiny face pressed against his chest, her arms curled around his neck. One of the cavalrymen muttered, "That's Whitmore's girl." Another lowered his rifle. The captain hesitated, then signaled his men to stand down. Clay was pulled the final few feet and collapsed onto the ground, clutching Ruth like a man who had just reclaimed his entire world. Red Eagle stepped forward and helped him to his feet. Clay nodded, breathless, eyes locked on the chief. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to help us," Red Eagle answered simply. "She helped us first." The cavalry dismounted slowly, confusion giving way to understanding as they looked around. No ambush, no raid, just a gathering of men who had come to protect a child. One of the soldiers bent to pick up Ruth's blue ribbon from the ground where it had fallen, stained with dust but no longer with fear. He handed it back to Clay, who tucked it into his pocket. As the tension dissolved and the warriors began to quietly disperse, the captain approached Clay. "You all right?" Clay nodded. "She's going to be okay." He looked back at Red Eagle. Because of them, the mine was quiet now. The danger passed, but something deeper had changed. A misunderstanding had nearly led to bloodshed, but in the end, trust had won. A rescue had become a symbol, not just of courage, but of the power of restraint, patience, and ancient wisdom. And as Clay carried Ruth toward the house, her head resting on his shoulder, he knew the line between strangers and brothers had just grown thinner than it had ever been before. The sky hung heavy over the Kansas plains, a blanket of gray that pressed down on the land as if it, too, sensed the tension below. At the edge of the ridge, soldiers from the local cavalry patrol tightened their grips on their rifles, horses snorting beneath them, eyes narrowed at the scene before them. To their minds, it looked like the beginning of an uprising. Nearly 200 Apache warriors stood in solemn silence around a collapsed mine entrance, their weapons nearby, their posture alert, and there, beside them, a white man, Caleb Whitmore, was being pulled from the pit with a young girl in his arms. From a distance, it looked all too much like a hostage situation. Captain Everett barked out commands to his men. Ready arms. Be prepared to engage. The riders fanned out, forming a semicircle with their rifles trained on the gathering. Drop your weapons, the captain shouted toward the Apache line. Step away from the man and the girl. Chief Red Eagle raised one hand calmly, making no sudden movement. His warriors stayed perfectly still, neither lowering their gazes nor reaching for their spears. There was no panic in them, only a deep, disciplined calm. Just moments earlier, Caleb had emerged from the unstable shaft, his arms wrapped tightly around his daughter Ruth. Her leg was badly injured, and his shoulder bore a gash from falling debris. But both were alive. The Apache had guided the entire rescue, laying out the rope system, whispering chants to steady the earth, and lowering warriors to ensure their safety. It had been a sacred act, a union of courage and care, but to the cavalry, arriving too late to witness the truth, it appeared to be a siege. One of the soldiers took a step forward, rifle raised. Looks like he's under duress, he muttered. Captain Everett nodded. We can't take chances. Fire on my command. But before the words left his mouth, Caleb, breathless and bruised, turned toward them and shouted, "Stand down, for God's sake, they saved us." The soldiers froze, eyes darting between the man and the imposing wall of warriors behind him. "You sure Everett called out? They didn't force you down there?" Caleb took a step forward, still holding Ruth protectively. "I went because she's my daughter. They helped us both. That medicine man," he motioned toward Silent Thunder, "he risked his life for mine." The captain hesitated, unsure. The silence stretched, thick with the possibility of disaster. One wrong twitch of a finger and blood would spill across the prairie. Then, something unexpected happened. Chief Red Eagle turned to his warriors and gave a short command. Without hesitation, the Apache stepped forward one by one and laid their weapons gently on the ground. Spears, bows, knives, each placed with care. Not surrender, but trust. Caleb turned to the soldiers. "You see that they're not here to fight. They're here because a little girl did something that mattered to them. Because she showed them kindness when no one else would." A young private lowered his rifle first, uncertain but moved. Another followed, slowly. The rest of the cavalry relaxed their stances, though their eyes remained wary. Captain Everett dismounted and walked toward Caleb, boots crunching on the dry earth. He glanced at Ruth, pale and shaking in her father's arms, then at the line of warriors who had given up their weapons not out of fear but principle. "I thought this was a raid," Everett said. "It looked like you were surrounded." "I was," Caleb replied, "by the only people willing to save my daughter's life." Everett turned to Red Eagle, offering a slight nod. "I misread the situation." The chief nodded once in return. "We came to honor a child who honored one of ours. That is not a crime." The two men stood in silence for a long moment, neither yielding, neither posturing, just two leaders standing on the fragile edge of peace. Then came a deep rumble from beneath the earth. The mine groaned, shifted, and with a thunderous roar, collapsed entirely into itself. A cloud of dust shot into the air, forcing everyone to turn away. When it cleared, The shaft was gone, swallowed whole by the land. Had they waited even minutes longer, Ruth would have been buried alive. Everyone knew it. The cavalrymen stared at the crater, some muttering quiet prayers. Everett looked back at Caleb. If they hadn't helped you, we'd both be gone. Caleb finished for him. Red Eagle stepped forward again, holding something in his hands. It was a torn blue ribbon, stained with earth and blood, the same one Ruth had worn in her hair the day before. He offered it to Caleb, who took it with quiet reverence, pressing it gently against his daughter's cheek. She gave it away once. Caleb murmured, "To comfort a dying man. Now it comes back to her." Everett exhaled slowly, the tension finally breaking from his shoulders. "What now?" he asked. "What happens next?" Red Eagle looked toward the horizon where the sun had begun to dip. "Now," he said, "we remembered some. And we tell the truth of this day not as enemies, but as witnesses." The soldiers sheathed their rifles. The Apache gathered their weapons but did not raise them. Caleb stood between them, his daughter in his arms, and realized that something greater than a life had been saved that day. A misunderstanding had nearly turned allies into adversaries, but dignity, restraint, and the selflessness of many had pulled them back from the brink. And as the light softened across the plain, those who had once stood with weapons ready now stood in shared silence, bound by a truth deeper than suspicion and older than fear. The dust hadn't even settled from the mine's collapse when Clay Whitmore stood face to face with Chief Red Eagle once more. His daughter Ruth was safe, wrapped in a woven Apache blanket, her leg now bound with care by the hands of warriors who had treated her with the same gentleness a mother might offer. The danger had passed, but the weight on Clay's chest hadn't lifted. He knew the day wasn't finished. Something lingered in the air, an expectation not yet fulfilled. Red Eagle stood tall, his voice low but firm. "There is one more matter, Clay Whitmore. One more step before peace truly settles." Clay wiped the dirt from his brow, still holding Ruth against his side. "I'm listening," he said, though his voice was weary. Red Eagle glanced at the child, then back at the man. "Your daughter gave everything she had for one of our dying. A blanket she treasured, her own safety. She sat beside a man she did not know, without fear, offering him dignity in his final hour. That is a sacred act among our people. She gave freely, completely. Now I must ask you, are you willing to do the same?" Clay didn't speak at first. The wind stirred between them as if urging him to think carefully. Red Eagle didn't blink. "You claim to understand the weight of what she's done. If that's true, then you must prove it. I ask you to give up your land, your entire farm. Walk away from it, everything you own. Only then will we know you understand sacrifice as deeply as your daughter does." The words struck like a hammer. Clay's grip on Ruth tightened. That farm was everything, built with his own hands after the war, acre by acre. It was all he had left of his wife, long buried in the pasture behind the barn. The wood of the house carried her touch, her scent. Every board, every tool, every fence line held a memory. And now, this man was asking him to give it all up. Ruth stirred in his arms, her eyes blinking open. "Are we going home?" "Papa," she whispered. Clay couldn't answer. "Not yet." He looked back at the chief. "If I say no," Red Eagle's gaze didn't waver, "then it will not undo what your daughter did. But it will mean you chose comfort over understanding. And that is a choice we must all live with." Clay set Ruth down gently, kneeling beside her. He ran a hand through her hair, brushing back the dirt and sweat. He could still hear her singing in his memory, her tiny voice lifting in song for a dying man she didn't know. She didn't do it for praise. She did it because her heart told her it was right. Could he say the same? He rose slowly, turning to Red Eagle. "I'll do it," he said. "You want the land, it's yours. The house, the barn, the fields, the cattle, every nail, every memory. If giving it up honors what she did, if it proves to you I understand, then I'll walk away." A silence fell over the camp. The warriors didn't move. The earth itself seemed to pause. Red Eagle stepped forward, his voice quieter now. "You would give it all?" Clay nodded. "I would." "And where would you go?" the chief asked. I don't know, Clay said honestly. But I'd rather lose this land than ever teach her that sacrifice isn't worth it. Red Eagle studied him for a long moment, then turned to one of his elders and spoke in Apache. The old man nodded and stepped forward, holding a small carved object wrapped in buckskin. Red Eagle took it and held it out to Clay. This was never about land, he said. We never intended to take your farm. It was a test not of wealth, but of heart. And you have passed. Clay looked down at the item in his hands. It was a carving two figures standing beneath a tree, one offering a blanket, the other a hand. What is this? He asked softly. It is our way of marking a bond, Red Eagle replied. Your daughter became one of us by her spirit. Now you, by your choice, you are not losing your home. Clay Whitmore, you are gaining kin. Clay stood still, unsure if he should be angry, relieved, or humbled. Perhaps all three. But when he looked down and saw Ruth smiling faintly at his side, the weight in his chest finally lifted. He knelt beside her again, pulling her close. We're going home, he whispered. But things are going to be different. Better. Red Eagle placed a hand on Clay's shoulder. Teach her both paths. Yours and ours. Let her grow with the strength of two worlds. Clay nodded. I will. Around them, the warriors began to gather their things. The wind picked up, carrying away the dust and tension from earlier. The cavalry had already departed, understanding more than they had expected. The danger had passed. The mine was gone, but in its place something stronger remained. As they returned to the farmhouse, Clay looked at the fields with new eyes. They no longer belonged only to him. They belonged to every moment of grace and courage that had taken place there. And the girl who once gave away her blanket to a dying man had unknowingly planted something deeper than wheat. She had sown the seeds of peace. The light of early evening stretched long across the Kansas prairie, casting golden hues on the tall grasses that danced softly in the wind. Clay Whitmore stood just outside the farmhouse, Ruth resting against his side, her arm tucked in his as the pain in her injured leg kept her from standing too long. The events of the day still rippled through him, the collapse of the mine shaft, the rescue, the near confrontation with the cavalry, and the solemn test posed by Chief Red Eagle, a test he had chosen to meet with sacrifice. But now, with the dust settled and the quiet returning, there was one more matter to face, one final thread that needed tying. Red Eagle approached, his steps slow, his gaze steady. The others stood back at a respectful distance, sensing the weight of what this moment meant. Ruth looked up at the chief with wide, curious eyes. She still didn't quite understand the way her actions, giving a dying man her blanket, singing him across the veil, kneeling beside someone the world told her to fear, had changed everything. But Red Eagle did. And so did Clay. The chief stopped a few feet from them and looked not at Ruth but at Clay. There is one last thing we must speak of, he said. Your daughter has crossed into a space that few ever do. She is of two peoples now, Apache by her spirit, white by her blood. If you choose to raise her in only one world, you risk tearing her in two. Clay listened without interrupting, his hand gently resting on Ruth's shoulder. You're saying I need to raise her by your traditions, he said. Red Eagle nodded. By ours and yours. Teach her to walk with balance, to know both stories, both languages. Let her be proud of each. Clay was quiet for a moment, the weight of the request settling in his bones. It wasn't just about customs or ceremonies, it was about identity, about raising a child who would never fully belong to one world unless she was allowed to embrace both. He looked down at Ruth. Her face was calm, trusting. This girl had faced the unknown without fear, had offered compassion without expectation. How could he do any less? He turned back to Red Eagle. How do I do that, he asked. I wasn't raised with your ways. I don't even know where to begin. Red Eagle stepped closer. Begin with listening. Let her spend time with us and let her learn the stories of the stars, the songs of the rivers. Let her speak the words we speak. And in turn, let her teach us the songs you sing and the stories your people hold dear. Clay considered this, then nodded slowly. I'll do it. I'll raise her with both hearts. I'll let her carry your stories and mine. I won't let the world make her choose between them. Red Eagle's eyes softened. That is the final vow. Not one of land or pride, but of guidance, and it is the hardest to keep. Ruth stirred slightly, leaning into her father. Will I still live here? She asked. Clay smiled and brushed a curl from her cheek. Yes, honey. This is still our home. But we'll visit the village. You'll learn things I never did. You'll know what it means to walk in two worlds with grace. Red Eagle knelt down beside Ruth. You are the beginning of something important, he said gently. What you did for our warrior many grown men would not have done. That is why we honor you. But you must never let the world harden your heart. Always choose to see with kindness. Like you did by the creek. She nodded solemnly, not fully grasping the depth of his words, but feeling their truth nonetheless. Red Eagle rose and turned to Clay. The farm remains yours. The land, the home, the place where she will grow. But now, it is also something else. A place of meeting. A place where no side is the enemy. Clay extended his hand. Not as a show, but as a promise. Red Eagle clasped it firmly. It was not just the handshake of two men, but a bridge between two histories, two legacies around them. The others began to move, some returning to their horses, others packing up supplies. The gathering was ending. But something deeper had just begun. As the sun dipped lower and the first stars began to glimmer in the sky, Clay led Ruth back toward the porch. She moved slowly, careful of her injured leg, but her steps were sure. She paused once and looked back at the line of riders heading off into the twilight. Do you think Mama would be proud? She asked softly. Clay placed his hand over her heart. I think she's smiling right now. Ruth leaned into him as they stepped inside, her new Apache blanket draped over her shoulders. It wasn't just a gift. It was a sign that she belonged, that her compassion had not only saved a life, but built a bond strong enough to change the future. From that day on, the Whitmore farm was no longer just another patch of land on the Kansas frontier. It became a meeting place, a resting ground, a schoolhouse of sorts where children learned to speak both English and Apache, where stories were shared by fires, where harvest dances followed Sunday suppers. And at the heart of it all was Ruth, a child born of one world but brave enough to carry two. Years passed and the Kansas plains changed with the seasons, but the Whitmore farm remained, steady as the rising sun. What had once been a simple homestead became something far greater, a quiet sanctuary built not only of timber and stone but of trust, memory, and the courage of a young girl whose single act of compassion had shifted the hearts of two peoples. Ruth Whitmore grew with the land, her spirit shaped by both the soft lullabies of her father's childhood and the rich chants of the Apache elders who visited her home with each turning moon. By the time she was old enough to run again on two strong legs, she could speak both English and Apache with ease, weaving languages together like the threads of the blanket that had started it all. That same blanket, once wrapped around a dying warrior by a girl too young to understand death, but wise enough to offer kindness, remained folded at the foot of her bed. Its faded blue corners and worn edges were cherished not for their fabric, but for what they meant. The blanket had been returned to her after the rescue, not as a relic, but as a token of gratitude and recognition. In the years that followed, it would become more than a possession, it would become a symbol. As Ruth came of age, she chose a path few others dared to walk. Rather than leaving for the larger towns or seeking a life beyond the farm, she remained rooted in the land that had once nearly swallowed her whole. But she did not stay small. She taught children Apache and settler alike beneath the same elm trees where her father once sat mending fences. She taught them to read and write, but also to listen, to hear the wind as the elders did, to understand the symbols etched into stone, to honor both the history written in books and the stories passed through firelight. She became more than a teacher. She became a bridge. At first, there was resistance. Some settlers muttered that she was too close to the Apache. Some Apache elders questioned whether a white woman could truly carry their songs. But Ruth, with the same quiet determination she had shown as a child, never wavered. She sat through awkward silences, through suspicious glances, through long winters when attendance at her lessons dropped to only 1 or 2 children. But she kept the school open, even when it was just her and the wind. And slowly, the world softened. It began with one family from the village sending their son, then another, then a settler's daughter who had heard that Miss Whitmore told stories about animals that talked and rivers that remembered. By the time Ruth was 30, her porch was lined with shoes of every size, and her classroom was filled with voices from both sides of the old divide. She taught arithmetic and medicine chants, Bible verses and planting rituals, history books and oral traditions. Her lessons weren't just about knowledge, they were about belonging. The farm, once known for its wheat and livestock, became known for something else entirely. It became a meeting place, a space where tribal councils and settler gatherings could sit at the same table and speak plainly. It wasn't always easy. There were tempers, misunderstandings. Old wounds reopened, but the ground held them all, and Ruth's voice always brought them back. She didn't speak loudly, but when she did, everyone listened. Clay Whitmore watched all of this from the porch with quiet pride. The man who once feared the unknown had come to embrace it, in no small part because of the child he had raised and the vow he had made. Red Eagle visited often in his later years, sitting beside Clay under the stars, both men watching Ruth guide the next generation towards something gentler than the past they had lived through. They rarely spoke of the mine or the rescue anymore. They didn't need to. It lived on in the silence between them, in the peace they had helped build. When Ruth turned 40, the Apache gifted her a hand-carved box made of cedar and bone. Inside was the blanket now preserved and embroidered with symbols from both traditions. A sun for warmth, a tree for growth, a river for memory. It had not been asked for. It had simply been returned again. This time meant not for use, but for legacy. She placed it in the center of her classroom, where all could see it, not behind glass or under lock and key, but on a simple wooden table where children could run their fingers over its threads and ask, "Whose was this?" And she would tell them, "It was mine when I was small, and now it belongs to all of us." Decades later, when Ruth's hair turned silver and her steps slowed, the community gathered each autumn to honor her work. They called it the Day of the Blanket. On that day, no lessons were taught. Instead, stories were told. Children dressed in both pioneer bonnets and feathered braids ran side by side through the tall grass. Elders from both cultures shared food and laughter beneath the wide Kansas sky. And Ruth would sit at the center, surrounded by generations, the blanket folded in her lap, her hands resting on it like one would hold a prayer. She never married. Her life had been dedicated to something bigger than romance, something that needed all of her heart. And when she passed quietly in her sleep one spring morning, the blanket was draped over her, just as it had once covered a dying man by the creek. It was buried with her, by her own request, to return to the earth and complete the circle. But its story didn't end there. A replica was made, bearing the same symbols, and placed once again at the heart of her schoolhouse. Because what Ruth had created, what a little girl had begun with a simple, selfless gesture, had become more than memory. It had become a legacy, one stitched into the very soil of Kansas, told in whispers and songs and passed from hand to hand like a sacred thread across generations. The story of Ruth Whitmore offers a profound reminder that the smallest act of kindness can echo through generations. A young girl's simple gesture giving her blanket to comfort a dying man transcended cultural boundaries and healed deep divisions. For older adults who have seen the world shift through decades of conflict and change, This story speaks to the quiet power of compassion and the lasting value of moral courage. It teaches us that peace is not forged in grand declarations, but in everyday choices to listen, to respect, and to care for others, especially those who are different from us. As we grow older, we often reflect on legacy. What will we leave behind? Ruth's life reminds us that legacy isn't measured in wealth or recognition, but in the love and understanding we offer to others. Her farm became a place of unity not because of its land, but because of her heart. In a time when division still exists, this story encourages us to be bridges between generations, cultures, and beliefs. It's never too late to be part of that work. No matter our age, we can choose compassion and leave behind something deeply meaningful.